many of you were at our talks yesterday? Well, that's not too bad, because I was going to apologize in advance because there's a few slides that I used again and a few photos that I've captured again. You probably saw this one a little bit yesterday. Actually, this one's just been updated, and I just got an update like 30 seconds ago, and there still is not landfall for what I think is going to be Hurricane Barry. Right now it's Tropical Storm Barry. You know, we always get that question, what's the difference between a tropical storm and a hurricane? And there really isn't much. I mean, whether you are at 50 miles an hour or whether you are at 79 miles an hour, the destruction is probably going to be very similar. So we're not so much concerned with Barry as to whether it's going to be a tropical storm or a hurricane. I'm more concerned with how much rain it's going to dump. The amount of rain is what's really going to cause the issue. We have been in Louisiana more times than I can count. We were there most recently in 2016 for their historic flood. And the storm itself that created the flood wasn't what was the issue. It wasn't the winds, it wasn't the destruction that came with that. It was all of the water that came thereafter. And then we had a flooding situation that went on for weeks. So these are the kind of situations, and I'll give you some other examples, that give me heartburn. It also makes my heart rate go up because I love it. I am truly a disaster junkie. Tim, who some of you have met in various talks, is a fellow firefighter, and you used to sleep with that pager next to the bed. My ex-wife, maybe because the pager slept next to me on the bed, would always make a comment, why do you bring that? Because it's the thrill, right? When that thing goes off, the heart rate goes up, the adrenaline flows, and I love it. And I love being here with you all, but I'd much rather be in Louisiana right now dealing with this disaster. Please don't take that personally. But I do love what I do. But what I want to do a little bit differently today than what we did yesterday, and yesterday was awesome, by the way, we had a great crowd. I want to talk a little bit about who do you need to know to be able to be most effective if you're stuck in handling a big case. Where did my vet just go? It was just here. Where are you? Oh, she's got a big case potentially coming up. That is going to be managing a large-scale incident, right? So it doesn't have to be a disaster to understand how the system works so that you can be more effective. So really for me, I want to do a couple of things. I want to make sure that you are aware of what's out there, specifically on the disaster side. And then how do you get contact with that? Because a lot of people, it just amazes me that there are so many folks, even in the emergency management business, that don't really understand what happens on the animal side. We are relatively new. I mean, the National Response Framework is about 40 years old. The animal piece of that is really about 15 years old. So we're still kind of learning how to do all of this, but the number one contribution I think I give when I go to a disaster is I have some of these answers. And so that's my goal for you today, is for you to be able to identify, well, who does what and how do I reach them? Because I think one of our biggest issues is we don't know what we don't know, right? Well, hopefully I won't compound that, but hopefully we'll also give you some ideas on what to do. All right, so when I'm talking large-scale incident, what do I mean? On the disaster side, we kind of rate them. And we say a type 1 incident, that's bad, because that's going to be a big, big event, right? It's going to go over for a long period of time, and it's going to involve a whole bunch of people to get the job done. Whereas every day, if you happen to be, let's say that you're a veterinarian and all of a sudden you got an animal that's crashing, that's something that maybe you and your tech are going to be able to handle. It might be 30 minutes, it might be an hour. It's relatively short-lived, right? So that might be in the clinical side, what we would refer to as a type 5. Everybody good with that? So it's really in terms of the complexity. So the more complex it is, the longer it's going to take, the more people you need, the higher the complexity, the higher the rating of the disaster. So when I'm talking about some type 1 disasters, just in this year alone, and the folks yesterday saw some of these slides, Certainly, the eruption on the Big Island is a type 1 disaster. It was incredibly complex. It was very difficult to manage the animal issues because every time we went into the field, we were putting our responders at risk. And you just can't do that, right? So there was a significant amount of complexity. There were a lot of people working on the response, and it went on for months. So that would be a classic type 1, if you want, incident. Another one from last year was the mudslides in Santa Barbara. That was a big issue. It was a big issue on a whole bunch of reasons. One, of course, was the political or the socioeconomic. It's a very rich community. There was a lot of folks being very vocal about how quick the response should be. There were also a lot of influential people that were saying that more could have been done earlier. Why weren't more evacuations done and required instead of just allowing folks to stay in their homes and then the next morning wake up and they're at the other end of the interstate? So this was a very complex disaster. There were a ton of people that were responding to this, and it went on literally for a good 60 days. You add the Thomas fire that was on the front end of it, and the entire time between the fire and the mudslide was probably 4 months. So another type 1. And then you get one, I hope it shows up better back there than it does here, but the Mendocino Fire was the largest fire in California state history, 435,000 acres. That's a big fire. And it was a merging of 2 different fires, which made it even more dramatic. At night, and we were sleeping just around the corner from here in our trailer, at night you could watch the fire rim, you could watch the fire go just for literally hundreds of miles. It was burning in such a big area like that. This was a very complex situation. Most of Cal Fire was there. There were a vast number of agencies that were responding to the animal issues, and it went on for quite some time. These are all just in 2018. Isn't that amazing? And then, of course, the biggie, the granddaddy of them all from an animal issue last year was the Campfire. Happened on November 8th. And they were, October 8th, excuse me. Yeah, when did you get hired? November. So it was November 8th. And they were still sheltering animals into January. So this one went on for a long period of time. It was incredibly devastating. A good chunk of the entire town, well, really the entire town of Paradise is gone, or to the point where the infrastructure is going to take months to replace. So another amazing, and the largest animal rescue, feeding in place, and sheltering operation since Hurricane Katrina. At one point, they received 1,000 requests for rescue in one day. 1,000. Do you think that would be a type 1 incident? Now, keep in mind that if this happened with Cal Fire, that does this every day, that has the management system in place to handle it and the expertise to do it, it may not have been as big a deal. But you put it in the hands of animal control that don't ever do it, and now all of a sudden are asked to be dealing with this catastrophic event on paralleled number of call volume. It was truly, truly a difficult process. And they did a great job, by the way. Anybody from California? Well, and then we talk about the other types. We don't type incidents like this, but I think it's important that you still put them in perspective, right? This was a case we did where you can see right away that these birds were, the good thing about it, they had at least their own little area that they could stay dry and out of the weather, but there's what we would refer to in a scientific way, a poop load of birds there. So there was a big, big event. It took a lot of people. I think about 75 of our folks were on the ground, and it took us one day to completely clear and then another day to do all the forensic work. So that was a big event. Another example, of course, is when you get into the dogfighting arena. This is actually a pretty good yard. It's fairly clean, but you can imagine how much time it takes and how many people it takes to go through that, do all the forensic work, capture all of the animals, do all of the intake. It's a big deal, right? So when I'm talking about these basic principles, don't don't be afraid to project this from the disaster world into your other life, which for many of you is a clinical world, I assume. Well, this is the evolution of my world, right? This is what's going on right now in Louisiana. So we've got a great example that we can just draw from. And what happens right now, and let me just step back a little bit. In Louisiana, they've been working on this for a week. So it's not like this just happened. Yesterday, we had an earthquake right under my house. It was only 4.6, but it was still right underneath my bed. I missed it because I was sleeping under the bed of Marriott, but it was still right there. Those you don't have all of this time to get ready for, right? With Barry, they've been looking at this for 7 days almost, really since after the 4th of July weekend. They kind of saw that that low might drop down out of Kentucky and Tennessee, get caught up in the Gulf, come in, get stirred up by that warm water, catch the shear, and boom, it did. It did everything that they thought it would do. So unlike many of the others, there has been time for those folks to kind of get ready for it. So we've actually got a presidential declaration before the storm even made landfall, which is kind of cool. But normally what happens is that you will have this local event and your local first responders, which could be you guys, depending upon whether you're involved with a county animal response team, if you're involved maybe with the Veterinary Reserve Corps, you guys will be first on ground, the first responders. And you're there and you're going to size it up and you're going to say, oh, we've got this. Or you're going to say, ugh, this is a lot bigger than what we expected. So then you're going to need a structure in place to help you manage that. And they will set up what's called an emergency operations center. And the county or the parish or the borough will run that and manage it. And they will come to you and say, animal people, what do you need? And how can we help? They won't lead that operation. They will be there to support your operation. And then if it continues to grow in size, you'll start tapping into some of your partners. Let's say that you have an MOU with one of us, one of the national organizations. You'll call us and say, hey, we got this situation, can you come help? Or maybe they've got another county within the same state that they work with on a regular basis, can you come help? Those are called interlocal agreements. So they're going to be tapping into all of their players that they normally would go into. If it still goes on and it still exceeds that, they're going to call the governor. And they're going to say, Gov, we're in trouble here. We need some help. The governor then will do his own assessment or her own assessment and will make a determination of whether there should be a declaration of emergency. In the case of Louisiana, the governor, Governor Edwards, real quickly came out and said, I'm declaring all 12 parish counties, it's now 13, or parishes, I'm declaring that a state of emergency. What he also did was very quickly then started thinking about, what if this grows? What if the flooding is significant and we need a presidential declaration? And he already put those wheels in motion. So when you're coming down this curve now and you're getting in that right-hand corner at about 5 o'clock, you'll see something up there that will say, okay, now he's starting to talk with the FEMites. Those are FEMA people. And he's going to start working on maybe getting a presidential declaration. If he gets that, then all of those federal resources can come in and help. It's huge. But also, depending upon the level of declaration and what's covered in the declaration, he's going to get 75 cents on the dollar reimbursed. Pretty cool, right? Not even reimbursed. Let me rephrase it. If FEMA comes in on a federally declared disaster, you only pay 25 cents on the dollar. And even that's negotiable. During Maria, in Puerto Rico, it was 0. During Katrina, it was 0. So the amount that the state is encumbered with will vary on what they can negotiate. I don't know what Louisiana is. So there's kind of what went on, and you can see that on this one in Tropical Storm Barry, the state declared those parishes a state emergency on the 10th of July. So 3 days ago, they were able to free up state resources. Now think about the difference for that county if all of a sudden, or the parish, and all of a sudden you had all of the state resources that could come help as well. What's the one thing everybody wants to see come? National Guard. They want those high, what do you call them? They can go anywhere vehicles, right? It's like yesterday, I was trying to think of volcano. I couldn't go volcano, and I went like this. I said, you know that stuff where the shit comes out of the... Deuce and a half, these big rigs, yeah. And they also, of course, want all of the other governmental or state agencies to come support as well, like Fish and Wildlife, because they have all of the boats. So when you get the state guys to come, and now you get all of the FEMItes, and you get USDA, you get Health and Human Services, they're looking a little bit more, they're smiling a little bit more right now, I think. So they got their presidential declaration on the 12th of July yesterday, and so we'll see how this thing goes. Right now, they're expecting landfall in the next 30 minutes. And there's it probably will just make hurricane strength at Cat 1 before it comes on. Well, here's probably going to be the most difficult slide you're ever going to see in your life, but I want you to all just say, ooh, that is really cool, because I put a ton of time into it. Well, what goes on at the local level? At the county level or the parish or the borough level, there are some players that are always involved, right? You get your American Red Cross, which hopefully you've all got a great working relationship with. You've got your local emergency management. Those are the folks, as I mentioned, are trying to help you and coordinate and get the stuff that you need. There is a county animal response team. How many of you are familiar with that or have one? Not as much as we would like to see. But the biggie, of course, in this first phase of it at the local level is what we call the authority having jurisdiction, or the agency having jurisdiction. In this case, it's almost always animal control. And then when you step that up to the state level, you get a lot of their counterparts as well. You'll have the state emergency management over to the far right. Those folks are the ones who are going to be kind of channeling or looking at all of the stuff that's going on at the counties and trying to coordinate it at the state level. You'll have the state animal response team, and New York has one. It's called the Empire State Animal Response Team. And then you'll have what's called the Veterinary Medical Association or the Veterinary Reserve Corps. Now, the Veterinary Reserve Corps can be housed in a whole bunch of different places, and Tim showed some of that data yesterday. We just finished a national survey to try and find out what our national capabilities are for providing veterinary support, and we've got some great data. Hopefully you got a chance to see that yesterday. And then you get the big one for us on the animal side, and that's Department of Agriculture. In all states, I'm trying to think if there are any exceptions. There is a couple. The group that is ultimately responsible for all things with four legs, almost all animal stuff, is Department of Ag. Now, when you get into the pet side, sometimes they'll push that over to Department of Health. I've seen it in a couple of other different categories, but for the most part, the group that we work with at the federal level and at the state level is Department of Ag. And that's a little bit of a conflict at times, isn't it? Because if you think about Department of Ag, contrary to what you might think, are animal welfareists. They are genuinely concerned about the nation's safety as it comes to animals. Though folks that are at the ground level for animal welfare that really are into making sure that every pet is healthy, sometimes there's a conflict with that large animal or that animal production agriculture. So it's a little bit weird sometimes because all of my friends are Department of Ag. And so when we sit down and drink a beer, we're not talking about agriculture because we know that that's just something, it's kind of like politics, right? You just don't want to go too far down that road. And then when you get to the national level, this circle is filling up. It's pretty impressive so far, though, wouldn't you agree? This slide is just amazing. So now, there you go, very good. Now you're getting into folks like, well, you're all familiar with AAWA. If you're not, you should be. Animal Welfare Administrators are just an amazing group. You've got National Animal Rescue Sheltering Coalition, an amazing group. I'm a little bit biased, but this is where all of the nonprofits come together and work in a collaborative way. So NARSC tonight is starting their nightly call for Hurricane Barry so that everybody can join one call and get up to date on what's going on and coordinate. I don't have a slide for NARS, but in addition to the NGOs, ASPCA, et cetera, the American Red Cross, PetSmart Charities, you're going to hear about a group called NACEP, which is a crazy acronym. That's all of the chief animal health officials. So this group of NARSC is a huge coordinating body when it comes to disasters. And then you get down here in the lower right above our logo, NEMA, the National Emergency Management Association, has really put together this amazing state-to-state borrowing system that we call EMAC, Emergency Management Assistance Compact. Sorry for all the acronyms. So we're going to talk about that player a little bit later on. But they're the ones that are allowing states to go back and forth.
These are all animal associations?
Yeah.
Or are some of them human and animal?
Well, NEMA, of course, the National Emergency Management, is primarily a human group. But they have recognized how important, and they've been with us now for the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years, working on animal issues as well. But the question was, are these all animal groups up there? Well, certainly they, like American Red Cross, their primary mission is to shelter humans. But they are also our primary counterpart when we're doing animals. National Animal Control and Care Association, and then there's that ugly acronym, National Alliance of State, Animal, and Agricultural Emergency Programs. Isn't that horrible? So just think of all of the state chief animal health officials, and they all come together. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about them in a bit. And then you get to the feds. So now it's really impressive. And now you can see that these are all the folks that are with us every time that there's a major disaster. Of course, the one that is most important to many of us within the Department of Homeland Security is FEMA. And then we get USDA, and then we get Health and Human Services. During the Campfire, for the first time, we saw Fish and Wildlife take a big load, which is under USDA. So when you look at it, there are a lot of people you need to know if you're going to effectively manage an incident. And the only advantage that I can think of being old like me is I know them all. And so when I go to an event, I can call them and just say, well, where are you and why the heck aren't you here? Or I need this, or can you help me find this? And without exception, now honest to goodness, I'm telling you a true story here. Without exception, they want to help. They might be somewhat tied up bureaucratically, and they might have some restraints on what they can do, but these are all good agencies with good people, and they want to help. Even if it's a mission to save koi fish. They are genuinely interested and want to make sure that you're doing what you're doing. So there you go. So I just finished really the important part of my slide, because this is what I just said to you. Who's out there? Who's going to show up at the table, and how do you reach them? And so during the Campfire, every single one of the groups, I built this right after the Campfire, because these were all of the people that showed up at our local emergency operations center wanting to help. And if you didn't understand what they did and how they did it, you couldn't tap into them. Well, let's use kind of an example again. This is just as of yesterday, people filling sandbags in Hurricane Barry. You're going to get sick of hearing about Hurricane Barry, I'm sure. Who's in charge? I got a free Starbucks coffee cup or coffee card. Who's in charge for that? The locals? Okay. Yeah. Would you guys agree that it would be somebody from that first group that I showed up there? Yes, go yay or nay. Well, shouldn't it be FEMA since they have a presidential declaration? Shouldn't FEMA be in charge? You guys were there yesterday. You cheated. Absolutely right. FEMA's never in charge. 2 coffees, yeah. The only time FEMA's in charge is when they're setting up the table for financial distribution. And then everybody wants to do whatever FEMA tells them to do. But this slide is cute, but I think it also portrays a basic sentiment in the country on what we think of our federal government. You know, one very famous politician ran on the campaign that he wanted to drain the swamp, right? Well, we all want to see that happen. We want to get rid of the excess government. So I think intrinsic within all of us is this feeling that the federal government is too big until poop happens, right? And then we want them there. And we'll be the first to complain if they're not there. And then we want them to rebuild our home in the exact same place so that when it floods again, they'll come and do it again, right? So there's this mistrust, and yet there's a dependence. So how's that almost I don't know if cognitive dissonance is the right word, but it's really this confusing thing in our heads as to what are we going to do with all of that? We want to trust them. We want them to be there, but on the same hand, we also want that autonomy that comes with either county or state rule. So actually, who's in charge is Barney, right? So you guys get the coffee. It is that local authority, whatever that authority might be. And so all disasters occur locally. They're managed locally until that local entity says, I just can't do this anymore, right? And then they can put up the white flag and said, okay, come save us. We need help. But guess what? Even if they do that, even if they said, let's say that one of the local parishes called me today and said, Dick, can you bring in your troops? And I said, sure. And I show up with this mountain of people. Guess who's still in charge? Barney is, right? Barney might want to go drink coffee and hide. Did a great presentation the last hour, and she was saying that folks that are out in the field doing all the work, they may want to come talk to their boss a lot because she's in an air-conditioned office drinking coffee. Well, that may be the same situation here. They might want to just sneak away, but you can't let them. If you are going to come in and agree to have that authority delegated to you, they still need to stay in charge. Well, the authority having jurisdiction is probably one of the most important concepts that we can hammer into you, and it's really important that you understand it. And really the reason that it's so critical is because it's going to keep you out of that mistake of self-deploying. And even just a couple of weeks ago in Arkansas for the flooding, Tim and I saw a number of situations where well-intentioned people just assumed, because they were, no offense, they were a vet, that they could walk in and assume a leadership position. They had not trained with the group. They were not even registered with the group, but they just assumed that because they could provide that service that they would be warmly embraced. And that's not going to happen, because if that authority having jurisdiction already has a system in place, already has a set of protocols, they know how they want to do business, and somebody just walks in, it's not going to be work. It's going to be disruptive. So just kind of keep that in mind. So once again, if the county is overwhelmed, they're going to reach out to all of these different groups. If they're still overwhelmed, then they're going to go to the state. And if they're still overwhelmed at the state level, they're going to go to the feds or their national partners. And then we get into this situation as who you're going to call. And you go back to that first slide, that beautiful slide that you all said was incredible. And you think about all of those people that were in that circle, who are you going to call? You need to know who it is that does what. So hang on, and I'll try and get as much of it as I can to you. And when you think of this is I don't like this photograph because it's not safe. That boat's not going to go anywhere. Did you guys see Mary Poppins yet? And you saw how they got on the ladder? They were pretty careful so that the ladder didn't do this. So I guess if they all got off the boat at the same time, it would probably work, but that one makes me nervous. But it is a great example of one carrying the load or one helping the other. You've got a National Guard vehicle that's a high water vehicle. You've got maybe a search and rescue boat, and then you might have local fire. So they're all kind of working together. The key is you need, if you're going to effectively manage this, an understanding of who does what. Well, let's start at the state level. Every state has a comprehensive emergency management plan. Every state does. They're required by law to have it. And to be silly not to. It'd be a liability, right? New York State has a beautiful plan. If you wade through that emergency management plan, you'll find all things animals. And all things animals in the state of New York falls under ESF 11, Emergency Support Function. All of the things that we need to do in a disaster, they're numbered. And I'll share that with you in just a second. ESF 11 is agriculture. And in the state of New York, it's called New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, I think. It's New York Dam. And those folks have done an amazing job of trying to establish a state animal response team. It's called, as I just referred to it, as ESART. But agriculture, by nature, is really their mission is to make sure that our food is safe as it comes from agriculture, right? That's their primary mission. Many of them don't understand emergency management. That just wasn't part of the curriculum when they went to grad school. And a lot of them don't even understand what are some of the specific issues when we get into small animal rescue. So they really then become dependent on other groups to help them, such as the State Animal Response Team and the Veterinary Reserve Corps. And let me tell you a little bit about each one of them and the prevalence of each one of them in the country. So this is a study that we did a couple of years ago. I called it the In-Care study. And really what I wanted to look at was what were the national capabilities, national animal response capabilities, so that we could then go to the federal government and say, hey, look, we're not nearly as well prepared as you think we are. We need your help. And I put, after we did the complete survey and we got 49 out of 50 states to respond, the one state that didn't respond was the state I lived in. So I kind of knew what they had, so we left it blank. That's the gray one on the left. The gray one on the right, Connecticut, did get their information in after we printed this slide. But from that, then, you can take a really quick look to see who has SARTs. And only about 67% of the country has a state organizing body. That's kind of scary, isn't it? Now, you're okay if you live in the hurricane or the tornado-prone states, because they have them. But if you live where we live, it's kind of embarrassing that both Tim and I live in the state of Washington and we don't have a state animal response team. So there's some work to be done in terms of SARTs, but really what is more concerning to me is that when you look at it from a county level as well. So now you're looking at the SARTs on the far left, and you're looking at big counties in the middle, and you're looking at small counties on the right. And you already saw the number for 65, I lied, at 65%. But here are the ones that scare me. Now you're looking at the next level of organization. Those are those CARTs, right? County Animal Response Teams. Only 50% of large metropolitan areas have a CART. The areas that have the most people, therefore the most number of pets, and we don't even have an organizing body. But then get into the rural counties. Think about all of the rural counties in your own state, and it's a quarter. So we have a lot of work to do to enhance, to build animal response capabilities nationwide, don't we? And then when you look at it on the medical side, on the veterinary side, that's a disturbing number to me. We just simply asked, and I just finished this study a couple of weeks ago. We asked them a whole bunch of questions, but the one that was most interesting for me to share with you is, do you have a VRC? Is there an organized group that will be able to provide medical assistance to your ill or injured animals in a disaster? And only 55% of the states have them. So what does that mean? We're going to be dependent upon other states and the federal government for a large-scale event that involves animals that are hurt, right? That's what that means to me. So let's look at some of the federal resources that are available to us. I joke, I love this slide because we spent so much time with the Cajun Navy during Hurricane Harvey. A great group of people, super, super people, big hearts, nice boats. They can get there quickly. They know how to fish like nobody's business, but they don't understand emergency management. So that was our big concern with all of that. Well, we have a couple of things that happened and were modified right after Hurricane Katrina. And the biggies for us was that President Bush pushed a couple of directives down to Congress. And they said, number one is we need to do a better job. And remember, this is right after 9/11. We need to do a better job of being prepared as a nation. We simply weren't, we didn't have our stuff together. So we need to have a way of being better prepared, and we need a framework or a structure so that everybody can do things the right way. So those of you that have taken Independent Study 700, does that make sense? Do you remember that one? The National Incident Management System, that was a presidential directive that let's have a goal, let's do a better job of organizing ourselves, and then let's build this basic framework where everyone will know how to work together during a disaster, and that's called the National Response Framework. Huge, huge direction for Bush, and it really was needed coming off of 9/11 and leading into Hurricane Katrina. The big part of how we bring these federal assets to Louisiana right now, the system that allows that to work is called the Stafford Act. You ever heard of that? The Stafford Act simply says that any federal agency at the request, now here's the key phrase, at the request of a governor can come and assist, either get paid or not paid, and provide that federal assistance, any federal entity. That's huge, isn't it? Well, if you look up there and you peer in there, you don't see a heck of a lot about animal stuff, right? Well, that changed with this legislation that came up in October of 2006, the Pet Evacuation Transportation Standards Act. You ever heard of the PETS Act? The PETS Act simply said that because really, I mean, the legislation by Bush was kind of in the works before Katrina, but Katrina really drove it home. This piece of legislation said we need to do a better job when people with their animals are evacuating. So here you go, folks. Every planning entity that is government related, I don't care what level you're in, you are required by law to have a plan that deals with people evacuating with their animals. So they're required to. Now, unfortunately, there's no teeth. Sometimes we call it an unfunded mandate. There's nothing that really forces folks to do it other than the threat that they might hold up or individual assistance if they don't, if they're not in compliance. But Tim and I travel the country constantly, and I can't tell you how many counties I go to that I say, can you show me your plan on how you're going to deal with that? Well, here it is. And sometimes they forgot to delete the state they stole it from, or the other county that they cut and pasted it, right? Or they had to take a vacuum cleaner to get the dust off. So here we've got this directive, this presidential directive to build this all-encompassing framework so that the entire community, and for folks that are in the animal welfare world, when we see whole community, I get excited because that means me. That means the animal world. So with this national response framework and then the latest revision in 2018, it was even broader, that included more animals. No longer are we just talking about pets. We're now talking about all animals need to be protected in some way. The federal government is not going to go out and help you rescue the cows that are in your backyard. We're still focused on pets, but we're getting closer and closer and closer. And right now what we're saying is if you are a planning entity, you need to include all animals. Huge. Think about how far we've come in such a short period of time. But the core to all of that are these crazy things I just referred to, these emergency support functions. Now at the federal level, we have about 15 of those. And I wanted to point out the ones that are relevant to you all. And the first one up there is ESF, Emergency Support Function 6. That's mass care. When you think of mass care, what agency do you think of? American Red Cross. At the federal level, it's still FEMA, but they partner very closely with Red Cross. At the local level, it is usually a Red Cross, a chapter of it, that's helping you set up that human shelter. They are also that group that's going to help you, in many cases, figure out how best to co-locate your shelter, or what they're doing right now in St. Charles Parish, cohabitating your shelter. so that people and animals are coming together. We gave them the square footage that they needed per family size. They've got it mapped out on the floor. You come in, you register and say, okay, it's myself and my partner, and I have 2 dogs, and you get 20-some square feet, and here you go. And you stay together as a unit. It's the way to go, right? So that's mass care. The other one that you'll sometimes see us be involved with is ESF 9. That's search and rescue. We're starting to do a lot more work with the human side of that. That's pretty exciting. The biggie for us is ESF 11. Oh, and I forgot another biggie, which is number 8 up there, public health. Public health is where the National Disaster Medical System resides and where the INVERT, National Veterinary Response Team, and I'll have a slide for that in a minute. But the biggie for us, the one that we work the most with, as I mentioned, is ESF 11. So when you hear about the federal government and you hear about animal issues, don't think that they're not interested. They have a lot of interest in what we're doing with animals and how they can help. USDA especially. Now what USDA has done is they took the way that FEMA breaks up the country into FEMA regions. We had a fun kind of exercise yesterday where everybody had to figure out what FEMA region they're in. I should test the coffee drinkers and double or nothing, not to remember what FEMA region, but. So Tim and I live in FEMA region 10. So each FEMA region has a USDA ESF 11 representative for that region. And these are the folks that are for each one of the regions. And you should get to know, at least have that name. It will impress somebody. If you go home, and for the person I was just talking to, I'm going to give them that reference to who is in their region. The individual that you introduced me to Puerto Rico, that's Holly Camille. So I'm going to put those 2 together. The individual that's working on the case in New York, I'm going to put them together with the USDA director for that region. So these are important people to know. So here are all those federal groups. So now you can go home and say, yes, the federal government does care about animal issues, right? And here is something that I'm going to have to pass on, unfortunately, but it's something I'm very excited about. Once again, I'm a little bit biased because I helped build it. This is a concept where FEMA, USDA, and the NGOs came together to build what we called the Household Pet Support Task Force. Now you think about it, the FEMA doesn't have any resources other than great planners and visionary people. USDA doesn't have any boots on the ground. The people who do the primary work in the country today are the nonprofits, right? American Red Cross, Salvation Army, the faith-based groups, the animal-based groups. So they brought the 3 of those groups together and said, let's look at this stuff as a planning task force to make sure that animal issues weren't forgotten. Isn't that cool? So we've tried this in a couple places in the country. And now, no matter where I go, usually the FEMite that's there will come over to me and say, Dick, let's make sure we're including you in these discussions. We don't want to forget about the animal issues. So it's encouraging when we see how much progress we made and how the federal government really does want to participate. But the group I thought would be most of interest to you folks is this group. The group that's got me most concerned at the federal level is this group. So as I mentioned, we have this amazing organization called the National Disaster Medical System. It's huge. I don't know how many hundreds of people are in that. And so that if there is a big event internationally, including national, that involves human people at risk, the National Disaster Medical System will bring you the federal resources to help out. One small piece of that is the veterinary component. So they are there if you are completely overwhelmed to come in and support you. And so that's called, oh, I've got VMAT in the background. I just recognize that. So the predecessor to INVERT was VMAT. Need to make sure I fix that. And this is the VMAT, or the INVERT team that came and helped us during Hurricane Sandy. So we were overwhelmed on the medical side. We were dealing with canine influenza. We had, oh my God, it was just horrible. And we had a ton of animals in this shelter. So I called the individual, once again, it's who you know, right? I called the individual that oversaw that program, and his name is Ty Van Evenhoven. I said, Ty, I want to write a request to get you guys to come in, but I want you to come in with them because I know there's going to be the political nature of that. And we did it. The county, the borough accepted it, the state accepted it, the federal government accepted the mission, and they were there, and they got every single member of their team an opportunity to come in and see what practicing in a real disaster was like. It worked beautifully. It was seamless. And they worked under the command and control of our medical director. First time in history that a federal agency came in under command and control of an NGO. And it just couldn't have gone any better. I mean, look how everybody's smiling. Had to have gone well, right? Well, I've got to, I want to get through resource typing, and then I want to get into one slide on EMAC, so I think we're doing okay. So hang in there if you're starting to get sleepy. We just finished a huge project on animal resource typing. Did anybody happen to take the webinar last week or 2 weeks ago? The one individual that's paying my salary, thank you. The rest of you need to start taking those webinars. This is one that we covered in a couple of weeks ago, Ashley, where we're now looking at this new process where we have gone through everything that's animal related and we typed it. And we said, okay, if you want to borrow a veterinarian, here's what the language will be so that everybody is on the same page on what a veterinarian will be able to do. And I'm going to share you with that language in just a minute. So we did two things. We did 508s, which you can see on the first slide. Those are the teams. And then we did the 509s, which were the individuals. So these now, all of these resources have been typed. Pretty cool. Now remember what I said about type. A type 1, is that complex or not so complex? Those are the very complex. So if you see somebody that's requesting a type 1 team, you know that these are people who really have their stuff together, right? And then these are the 509s. There's 11 of those and 9 of the teams, so there's 20 total that we were able to get FEMA to accept. And there's where you guys will fall as individuals. Somewhere in there, if you're interested in getting involved with disaster work, that's where you'll reside. And you need to know what those are. So that if you're really thinking about getting into the disaster world, you can look up your position, and I'll show you how in just a second, and find out what it is that folks will expect of you if you show up on a disaster. On the Campfire, I put in a request for everyone that you see on that list. Every single one of them. Unfortunately, every single one of them was denied because the state was trying to stay in-house. They were trying to really not get out into the other states. Eventually, they had to. But initially, when we were putting all those out, it was perfect for us because we could say, okay, what we really need is a behaviorist. Because we've got the shelter that's got 1,000 animals in it, and everybody's going wacko. Send me some really good animal behaviorist. And then they said, well, what is that? Is that a trainer? I said, no, here's the document. Here's everything that you need to know so that you can get just the person that you're looking for. So this is a very valuable process that we completed. And I wanted to share with you what the veterinarian looks like. From the first session, it sounded like we had a lot of vets in that group. And that's how we came up with it. And trust me, even though I was part of that group, I'm not a veterinarian, but we had 2 veterinarians that do this all the time that helped us with this language. So hopefully we caught it. And then after we were done, it was adjudicated nationwide. Everyone had a chance to weigh in on it and see it. And it passed the test. So hopefully we didn't miss too much. But there's kind of what we expect if we bring you in. And these are some of the skills and some of the things that we expect you to be able to do. There's some of the training that we would like you to have. Is it negotiable? Sure. It's all up to what your state is willing to send. Isn't that nice? To kind of have that consistent language where we're all on the same page for every single thing that we could possibly ask for. So once again, going back to that first slide, it's who you know and how do you tap into the system. So now you'll know, you just say, well, I need a bunch of vets. Well, is that small animal vet? Is that large animal vet? What kind of stuff do they need to bring? What are they capable of doing? I think I even had one on there, whether they could lift a 50-pound weight or not, but I don't know. It might have gotten dropped. And then when you start to look at it from the veterinary teams, this is kind of cool. You go onto the very far right-hand column, and you look at a type 4 veterinary team. This could be small animal or large animal. It's a vet and 2 vet techs. or vet assistants. We had to drop tech for a whole bunch of reasons, but it's 2 folks to help a vet, and that's a type 3 team, or 4 team. Piece of cake, right? And then as you move to the left on the screen, it gets more and more complex, and more skills are required till you get over to the point with a type 1 vet team. Now you're looking at 13, right? Where is it? You need 13 people to fill that. If you go over to the far right and you start adding the people that we added in each column, it will add up to 13, I hope. We checked it several times. So now if I'm asking for a type 1 team, those guys really need to have their stuff together. It may be that the vets and the vet techs that are coming are equally skilled. There's just more of them. So here's how you can find it. Just go to FEMA. I just did this yesterday. FEMA Animal Resource Typing Tool. And if you don't forget that, just put resource typing tool. And all you got to do in that blank right there is put anything with animal, and you'll get all 20 of them. It's a piece of cake. And if you didn't get that, then just send me an email and I'll pass that along. Well, I want to finish up with one last slide. We're perfect, I think. And that is this Emergency Management Assistance Compact, or basically just think of it as state-to-state borrowing. But state-to-state borrowing has to have this nomenclature. It has to have this common language, or it doesn't work. So that if Louisiana, and they probably won't because they're kind of picky about this, but if they were to go out to Texas and say, can you send me Texas A&M medical unit, can you send them over, which is a really amazing group, then they would use EMAC, a state-to-state borrowing system. And I wish I had the time to tell you how it works, but the important part of it, it's been ratified by Congress. All 50 states signed on, so that if you are a vet, your vet licensing travels with you. And you don't have to worry about any of the insurance issues. All of those things go with you, and that's true of a vet tech as well. It's the only process that we have that protects you as you go from state to state. Now, you can't just waltz in. This is where the borrowing state has already agreed that the sending state is going to do this. All of their certifications have been checked and so forth and so on. So it's not like you can just waltz in. But it is an amazing system. The only disadvantage to it is the borrowing state pays for those resources. But guess what? If you're in Hurricane Barry, if you're in Hurricane Barry, you've got a Fed deck, right? You're going to get reimbursed for those expenses at 75 cents to the dollar. So not a bad deal. And real quickly, I thought I had on here, there we go. These are the ones that I requested on an EMAC, state-to-state borrowing for Butte County, medical, sheltering, and subject matter expertise. Well, I want to leave you with the same slide we've left with for everybody. If we've spurred up those adrenaline juices, if you're thinking about you want to do the disaster world, there's no better organization and no better conference in the world to learn about disaster stuff than the NACEP conference. Coming up in December, 10th through the 12th, in lovely downtown Bellevue. All right, have a great day. Thanks for hanging in there.